Hi, everyone. This is the Perspective with Viv podcast. My name is Viv, and welcome to the show. Today's title is Rewiring the Soul with Reginald Martin. Reginald Martin is a spiritual architect, metaphysician, and creator of Kemetaphysics, a transformative framework that blends ancient Kemetic science with modern psychology. Through his work, Reginald helps spiritual leaders, creatives, and high performers heal subconscious religious programming, reclaim inner sovereignty, and reconstruct their identity from the inside out. His mission: to guide people beyond belief systems and into soul level alignment, where peace, power, and purpose are self sourced, not performance based. I love that. Hi, Reginald. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Hi, glad to be here and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I cannot wait to dive into everything that you talk about. So let's just start. You say you didn't just leave Christianity, you left an identity script. What does that mean?
Yeah, and when you really think about it, that's what Christianity does for all of us is that it really forms our identity.
Hmm.
And what it essentially does is forms our identity around really what I call negative programming and giving us a negative script to operate from. So what that means is from a religious perspective and from a Christian's perspective, every Sunday we are taught that we're born sinners. So we're born sinners, we're broken, we're wretches, and because of that, we need something to save us. Okay, so so that becomes the identity and frame that we operate life through. Is through that idea that we're broken and something outside of us has to be the savior. So when we're talking about that and when people are deconstructing, that frame has to be reframed and our minds rewired. So that's basically the foundational principle here is that the Kemetic teachings are really the ancient teachings before Christianity changed them and distorted them. So you take the ancient teachings, go back to and reclaim the ancient teachings so that you can reframe your identity and rewire your mind to a more empowered perspective.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, let me ask, how did you begin this journey? What was the moment when you said, you know what, I'm just going to go back, see what things were like before I was indoctrinated?
So it really started for me very young, Viv. I mean, I was probably 15 years old. Well, I not probably I was, and I started to having questions about my childhood religion and how it basically said that people should be treated and how we should be thought about. And the first big question that I wanted to find out about was the idea of going to hell. I mean, being sentenced to eternity without any chance of redemption, that's a pretty big deal. Okay. So that at the age of 15, I remember asking my mother, would it be true that if somebody who was Jewish and didn't believe in Jesus as their savior, they did good all their life. And then when they died, they would go to hell for eternity. But someone who was a mass murderer that did bad all their life just simply needed to accept Jesus on their deathbed and then they would go to heaven. Okay. So that was a 15-year-old asking this question, you know? And my mom looked at me and said, yeah, Viv, that messed me up. So
Wow.
I was like, really? I mean, that just something just does not seem right about that, you know? And so that started my quest to really start to look for answers. And, you know, as time went on, just asked other people things. By the time I got to college, I decided for a number of reasons, I decided I was an atheist because I couldn't accept that idea. And really, another question I asked Viv was, if I had children, and even now, I would think about that. Viv, I have children, okay, and I thought to myself, I have children. Is there anything that my child could do that say I would banish them for eternity and never ever forgive them for? Is there anything that they could do to me that I would never ever forgive them for, and they were irredeemable? And I said, there is no way. There's nothing that they could do. I don't care what it is. They couldn't do that. They couldn't do that to me. And I could never say I could forgive you. So my next question was, am I more benevolent than God? So all of that really made me ask a lot of different.
That's a really good question to ask. Are you benevolent, more benevolent than God? So when you talk about identity resurrection, what does that look like in real life for someone healing spiritual trauma?
Great question. Great question. And yeah, so identity resurrection, Viv, is when we really learn to remember who we were. And the ancients, they termed the idea of remembrance, okay, to remember, okay? And so what that means is that the ancients saw us as the light of God or the light of the creator that incarnated into the physical world, that projected into the physical world. Once we incarnate, there is this mechanism, and I don't know what that's called necessarily, but we forget that. That's kind of part of the game when we project into the physical world. We forget. And resurrection is when we come back and we remember who we are. So it's remembrance. So that is the identity resurrection, is when you remember that you are, and you remember yourself as a soul and the power that you have as a soul to really create your life on this planet of existence.
Thank you for that. And I think that it's really important for people to remember that they are actually an entire being, divine being, before this ego identity, before labels started to be attached to us, mother, father, daughter, woman, Nigerian, American, all of that. And the storylines and narratives that come with it that hinder us and restrict us. That's why you shifting from Christianity and actually challenging Christianity at an early age is so impressive, but it's important because it's kind of like an institution. And within the institution, you believe certain things and you can't think outside of that. You ask the question to your mom, and your mom had like a boxed answer that, yeah, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. Like, there's more to that. But I feel as though as an institution, you're not meant to ask certain questions. You're just meant to accept. And then you brought in the more beautiful question, am I more benevolent than God? Because then we start to think deeper. Why are we being condemned? Why is everything about hell, hell, hell? So many things. I love that. So
Yeah.
thank you. Identity resurrection for me, when I heard about it, was that it's a very powerful term because it's about unraveling and unlearning the identities that you thought you had to be, you thought you had to conform into, the programming that is not aligned with who we truly are. It's about shedding old skin. And then the resurrection comes when the true soul being within you rises. Ironically, I was just thinking about when Jesus rose from the dead, the real you, the true soul being of you shows up. A lot of people don't go back to that part of them. They don't connect with that part of them. So they lose certain aspects of their life experience because it's limited. So yes, that term alone is really, really powerful. But what does it look like in real life for someone healing spiritual trauma?
Yeah, and you make some really good points. I love how you phrase those ideas, because
Thank you.
it really comes down to all these ancient teachings were about us. They weren't about this being that we were supposed to worship. It was about us. But how that trauma heals and what that looks like is usually when you've accepted those ideas. And I just think about myself. I think about how people, my family and my community, how that ended up manifesting itself in our communities. And usually, when you believe that you're broken, you're a born sinner, you're unworthy, you don't build something that is whole and worthy and valuable. Okay, that's the opposite of that. So, from an ancient Kemetic perspective, it is the idea that what we are within, our essence, our soul essence, is projected without. Okay. So, as the old saying goes, what you think and believe is really what is projected outside of you. In order to heal that, one has to be able to gain the confidence and the knowledge that they are builders, that they are creators. And in that frame, I think it is almost impossible to do. You have to be an exception to the rule in order to be a builder. okay, in order to be a creator. And I see that in our communities, especially within the African diaspora all over the world. A lot of our communities are broken. And it's because that we've accepted that idea and that terminology every Sunday. And that has to change.
Powerful. And that's, you call people builders, creators. That's why you often say identity is architecture.
Yes, exactly. If you know that you are a creator, then that belief is going to be projected outside of you. That's what you are building and what you're creating. And that's what the ancients were teaching, is that who you are from within is being projected without. As within, so without. As above, so below. That's what those ancient ideas meant. And if you believe that you are broken, how do you build?
Yes. In tarot, there's a card called the Tower, one of my favorite cards. I'm sure you may know since you're a tarot enthusiast. It's about the
Yes,
castle
I am.
falling apart. The castle falls apart, and the castle represents your identity, and the foundation is shaky. That's why the castle falls apart. And those people that were in false positions of power fall, and there's that reckoning and realization that, oh my goodness, this is not what I was meant to build. That's why it's falling. So I have to restart. And the thing is that one limitation that people tend to have is the inability or the unwillingness to rebuild. Reginald, when I tell you that I've rebuilt and rebuilt over and over to the point where I was like, you know what, this is so easy. Let's see if we can try and build a castle that stands now. We know what it's like to be at the start. Okay, can we see something really actualize and stay, you know? So the beauty of being is in that creation, is in building that. It's in finding the fun in that, because you're actually building your life. But you actually have to start with your beliefs, because your life outside wouldn't change if you don't change on the inside. And that's the most amazing part, because it shows that you are fully in power. There's no need to have a victim mentality. There's no need to see yourself as somebody that is oppressed. You can change things inside and things will change outside. And if we all collectively do it, we change the world. It shouldn't just be one individual or one person.
Wait. Hey. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I
Thanks
love
for
it.
that.
I love it. And you are so on point. And that's where I feel like we have been taught these ideas that really make us shrink and really make us feel like we're less than, and in so many areas of our lives. How do you love, truly open a space of love for another human being if you can't even love who you are?
So true.
You know, so it's so many areas that this infiltrates, and we don't even think about what it does. We just repeat these mantras that I'm broken, I'm unworthy, I'm a wretch. We repeat these mantras. And the thing is, if you know, again, I don't know if you have children, but I have children. There is no way that I would have ever taught my children to stand up in a mirror every morning and repeat those as affirmations.
Yes.
There's no way we would do that. But yet in church, we ingest it every Sunday. And because we're supposed to be humble, we accept those ideas and we don't question it. Be obedient, be humble.
Yes, you're so right. And I'm pretty sure that in parenting, I'm not a parent yet, but in parenting, you've been able to have children that think outside the box. I can't imagine how your children think and how they see the world, because they had a conscious parent willing to do the work to uncover aspects of themselves that were deeply buried. And then, return to particular teachings that really, really teach us about who we are, and then relay that to their children. What's that like?
Yeah, and Viv, that's again a beautiful, beautiful question, because really my children taught me something, okay, as they were growing up. And what they taught me is that these ideas I cannot force on somebody else. They have to be realizations that you make for yourself. So I could be there as a parent. And believe me, at first I was trying to pour all of this stuff into them. And my children just said one day, just, Dad, I don't want to hear all of that. You know, that was like,
Wow.
so, but I give my children the space to speak and speak honestly. Okay. So at that point, I had to say, push back. At the time, their mother was Christian. She was a believer, and I wasn't. But I was trying to help them not go through those roadblocks and those walls that they were going to meet. But what I had to realize was is that I had to give them their space to choose which direction that they wanted to choose, you know? So that's what they taught me was is you can't force this on somebody else. You all you can do is be, and then you give them the ability to choose and reframe their life in the way that they want.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. But I am curious, what made you marry someone that has Christian beliefs when you had your own beliefs?
Yeah, the Christian was all I knew. So at that time, this was years ago, that's all I knew. So I didn't even know the things that I teach today. I didn't discover these ideas in probably 15 to 20 years later. So,
Oh,
everybody was Christian. So even I
mm,
went back to Christianity even after I was atheist for a while.
wow. Thank you for sharing that.
And that was because I didn't know anything else.
Okay, okay. So from my perspective, I thought that it was during your young years that you were able to find kemetaphysics. Can we dive more into that? Because I didn't know that it was later on. What's the journey with that? Where was that point where it was like, okay, I found this thing and this has changed my life. This is what I'm going to teach.
Yeah, that didn't happen until let's just say I was atheist by the time I was 18. And in that sense, it was atheism in the context of I didn't want to accept the Bible God that I was taught. Okay. So that to me, that God just didn't, it could not exist. That God was just unrealistic and unpalatable for me. From my college years all the way up until I was married, I was kind of in a deconstructive mode where I didn't went I would say I moved away from being atheist, but into I guess a space of agnosticism. But I still didn't belong to a church. Once I got married, I wanted my children to have a spiritual connection. Okay, it's something to be spiritually grounded, and that's where I went back to the church. And that's because I just didn't know anything else, you know? It wasn't until probably 10 years later that and this was after we were divorced, excuse me, that I discovered the secret, okay, or the secret discovered me, I should say. And that gave me the ability to reframe ideas that I had, what I now call metaphysics.
Hmm.
It gave me the ability to reframe it into or outside of Christian beliefs, outside of religious beliefs.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, honestly. So what is chemetaphysics and how is it different from traditional beliefs?
So, kmetaphysics is the idea of the Egyptian idea of the ka, okay, which is means the soul, and then metaphysics is the philosophy of spirituality. Is the
Wow.
way that you could look at that. So what I did was is I studied ancient Kemetic teachings, which is ancient African spirituality, really, that came out of ancient Egypt. So Kemet was prehistoric Egypt, and it existed for thousands of years before. But the ideas that they had, they were really African beliefs that were all over the continent, but just in different names. Okay. So for instance, the idea of Ashe in Ifa, the idea of Nayama in Dogon tradition, all of that is connected to the ancient Kemetic idea of Heka, which is the source of really the magic behind everything that's created. In Christianity, that same idea became what the Greeks called the logos or the word. And are you familiar with the Bible verse, John 1:1, that says, in the beginning was the word, word was with God, and the word in the beginning was the word created God, and the word was with God. Okay. That is a reference back to the ancient African concept of what the Egyptians call Heka.
Hmm. Interesting.
Okay. So metaphysics is bringing and bridging all of these ideas together into a spiritual system. So it's not like switching beliefs from religion to something else, because the difference between religion and spirituality is that religion, it has an external locus of control. That's what psychologists call it, is that you have something outside of you that empowers you, gives you power, or takes it away. Okay. But from a spiritual perspective and from the Kemetic perspective, it is an internal locus of control. You are the source that has an essence, and your avatar is projected into this reality.
Mm.
That essence and source empowers you from within to help you create the reality that your avatar wants to experience. That's one way you can look at that.
Thank you for sharing that. Wow. That's just impressive. That's just like amazing. And taking it back to The Secret, right? I discovered that at like 16.
Mhm.
I feel as though for some of us, we always do end up having those moments where we're questioning everything, because I come from an Islamic background. So it's like you have your practice that you have your religion that you're born into, and then there's somebody in the flock that thinks, oh, well, is there more to life? For some reason, when I came across
Mhm.
The Secret, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for. It was the book. And then I watched the movie, and right, like you just feel like, oh gosh, this whole feeling that I've had about life being more than what I know it is. Like I've not seen anything that confirms it, but I just know. And then The Secret just finds you, and then you watch it and you're like, I knew it. And you're like, oh my gosh, how can I manifest the life that I want for myself? I've been trying to practice manifestation my whole life since then. I was 16. I'm in my early 30s now. And for me, I just felt like it opened up a door to knowing our inner power, which is bringing it back to kmetaphysics. What I like about it is that we are the locus point, we are the central point, we are the source. We're drawing energy and validation from ourselves. And so in doing that, in using that, we're also using that to create the life that we want for ourselves, because everything happens internally, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Perfect, perfect. Now let's talk about spiritual software upgrades. What are they? And what's one spiritual malware belief most people carry?
Yeah, and that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. So spiritual malware is when you basically ingest what becomes essentially a virus into your mental system, into your mental operating system, because the mind is projected into reality. And if you ingest malware, then you cannot manifest the things that you want. And one of the things I really, and like you, when I watched The Secret, it really confirmed things that I already knew deep down, but I didn't have a language for. Okay. I didn't know how to put it into any context. The idea that thoughts became things, that really set me on fire, because I was like, man, I know this is true, because there's things that happened in my life, Viv, that I just know that when I heard that term, I knew that that was real. But it was too simple. Something was just like, well, that really sounds great, but I've thought a whole lot of stuff and it ain't became things yet. So what's up with that? Okay. So that's really when I started to study ancient Kemetaphysics, it was to look for the secret to where these ideas originated, because in The Secret they alluded to the Greeks having the secret. They didn't say it, but they just showed the Greeks and scrolls, in the movie.
Yes, you did.
So I knew at that moment that I knew that the Greeks had been taught by ancient Africans, that had been taught by the
Egyptians.
Egyptians. That's where I started to kind of start looking. And when I did, that's when I found the ideas of The Secret. And then what helped me more was to the idea that thought becomes things is a start, but you have to go
The
to your
feeling.
internal programming too. Okay.
Mm.
You
Hmm.
have to go. It's like if you think of your life as a garden, or your mind as a garden that grows, that starts, that you can plant seeds and it grows fruit, flowers, whatever. The thoughts and the fruits are the manifestation. The seeds are the flowers and fruit are the manifestation. But if your internal soil is toxic to the seed, it cannot grow. So I asked the question, Well, I thought a whole lot of things, but why hasn't it manifested? Why hasn't my seed sprouted? And a lot of times it was because my internal soil was toxic to what I was planting.
Your subconscious beliefs, the malware.
Subconscious beliefs, yeah,
Oof.
the malware, yeah, the all of that
Negative
programming, even with
programming.
the religious, the negative programming, even with the Christian stuff, you don't just stop believing and get over that programming overnight, especially if you were raised in it.
Yeah, so true.
That stuff wraps itself around a whole lot of things. And like an onion, you can peel back one piece, but then you find something else that it was wrapped around. Peel back that piece, and you find something else. And you can keep peeling that onion for a long time, but you have to peel back the onion to get to the root and to really till the soil and make the soil fertile.
Beautiful. Because that's
That's
why
your
they,
internal being.
yes, yes, yes. And that's why they talk about shadow work, going into the shadows, to the
Yes.
root, to the core of all our traumas and triggers, and then healing that. And it's a beautiful work, listeners. People are afraid of the shadows, but that's where you can find the most light, the brightest light. But we just look at the
Yes.
first form. We don't know that we can transmute it, upgrade our
Yes.
programming. Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And from a comedic perspective, these shadows are really the things that you don't like in life. That's what's being projected is those are your shadows. That's what's being projected. But you have to recognize what those projections mean for your internal vibrational essence. Because your essence is being projected, but to recognize it, but you can see those shadows as the parts of the life that you don't like.
Yes, thank you. Very good. Okay, so now let's talk a bit about symbolism since we've landed in Egypt. And fun fact, I've had past lives in Egypt where I was a priestess and I've been called to go there in this life. Yeah, you too. Hi.
I was a priest.
I love that. Let's talk about past lives. Tell me your past life when you're a priest. I want to know.
So I was actually a priest in Akhenaten's court.
Ooh, I don't know.
So and I think this is true to form because a lot of times we end up gravitating towards things that we lived in the past because we've obviously accumulated some wisdom that we carry through lifetimes with us. So that's the way I see that. And I'm actually bringing into these ideas a lot of things that people hadn't heard before, but I know to my deepest essence that they are real and true, and not because I say so, but because of the impact that it has in people's lives. Because to me, it's not just about coming up with an idea. It's like, how does that idea manifest in your life and how does it help? How does it really bring you peace, balance, and harmony? You know, so that's the true test of anything for me.
Hmm, interesting. Okay. So all I remember from my past life in Egypt.
So I'm curious, how does your past life how does your past life as a priestess, what does that do for you now? How does that manifest itself?
I mean, we're on this podcast, so I would say that this is one of those things. This is how it manifests. This is one way it manifests. This, my past life as an Egyptian priestess, having this podcast and everything we talk about and how we're trying to like dive deeper into other aspects of life that people may not necessarily know about, and how most guests that come on are people that have divested from religion, which is so funny, and they just have their own new spiritual journeys and just this expansive way of thinking and these experiences that they've been able to have because they stepped out of the box. But in other ways, in my writing, because I write fiction, I insert all these spiritual teachings, just whip it up in there. And like when people read it, it's like, yeah, we're reading fiction, but we're healing as we're reading. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what I can tell by listening to you, Viv, is that you have been through some stuff in your life,
Hmm.
some difficulties. You've worked through some shadows. And you know how I can know that is because you have a level of wisdom that is not common. And the
Hmm.
way that you even talk about and explain these ideas, the only way you can get there is that you've lived it and you went through something and reconciled it.
So true. Spot on. So thank you for seeing me. I feel seen and validated.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk a bit about symbolism since we're talking about Egyptian culture and teachings. And you know how they used
Hmm.
hieroglyphics. Thank you. Hieroglyphics. How they use, I loved that. I
Hmm.
always loved that as a kid because we've lost a lot of ancient knowledge. So it was interesting to see some of them documented and recorded. And, at least for me, I always had this wish of, wow, I wish I could see one in person. Let me see if I can decode it because I just have this natural thing for symbology. I'm a tarot reader. Like when I started tarot, it was like I started it and it showed that it was a past life gift with how quickly I just got it and was doing readings for people, and I'm also very spot on. But one of the things that made me happy was that my soul started to sing because it felt that, wow, finally I can work with symbology again. And that has always stayed with me. Like even in dreams, dream work, like there's nothing. I love symbols. That's all. So that's why my next question is, what role does symbolism play in helping people unlock emotional or energetic freedom?
Oh my God, you ask such good questions.
Thank you.
Let me process that for a second here, because to me, and how the ancients, and I like to go back to how the ancients taught it, because the hieroglyphs, and actually what they called it was the Medu Neter.
Hmm.
Okay. And Medu Neter stood for words of God. Okay.
Okay.
But the Medu Neter, they weren't words, they were symbolic ideas, they were symbolic constructs. Okay. So one hieroglyph has many layers of meaning. They're multidimensional. But the way that they looked at it was is that the real world is the metaphysical world, the world that precedes physicality. And everything that is physical comes from the metaphysical world. But you've probably heard of the idea of the law of correspondence. That idea means that from the metaphysical world, when something projects into the physical, it corresponds to a metaphysical vibrational complex.
Hmm.
That vibrational complex simply forms itself as something in the physical based on its essence, its vibrational essence. That's what any symbol is. It's a representation of something that is bigger and greater in a sense. And when you understand the symbol, then you can get insight into what it represents vibrational. Our lives are essentially vibrational complexes being projected as people, as events, as whatever it might be. But it is something being projected from the metaphysical world into the physical world that's being reflected back to us to help us glean how we are being
Hmm.
from within. So that's one way that's if when you understand something from what I would call a symbolist perspective, you gain a level of wisdom that can be uncommon. So when you're doing your tarot reading, a card, you can look at a cup that just say like the Queen of Cups, okay? Does that Queen of Cups have one meaning? No.
No.
That Queen of Cups, depending on the experience, depending on your intuition, that Queen of Cups can have many different layers of meaning, and depending on who you're doing the reading for. That's how the Medu Neter acts. And it reaches you at the level of your knowledge. It reaches you at the level of your wisdom. So, for instance, somebody can look at, say, like a doctor can look at an eye, because the eye is representative of a metaphysical, or I'm sorry, the eye is a projection of a vibrational complex. But a doctor can look at an eye and get a whole lot more depth of knowledge than you and I could. An eye doctor could look at it and get a whole lot more depth of knowledge because that doctor has more knowledge about the eye itself
Hmm.
and what it could represent.
Yeah.
That's how, when you look at the Queen of Cups, you're going to get a whole lot more from it than somebody like me who looks at the Queen of Cups.
Beautiful. So basically, symbology is subjective, and there's not one
Absolutely.
meaning. There's no one meaning that I can associate with a symbol. And it's all depending on the on the consciousness of the observer.
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful.
And what I like to say is that the secret sauce to really looking at symbolic language is really the implied meanings that can be behind it. For example, you can look at a chair, and of course, the obvious meaning of it is that the chair is something that you sit on. But the implication of the chair is that it is something that is foundational, that it is supportive.
Hmm.
Those can be implied when you look at the chair.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a deeper way to look at the symbolic language, you know? And the other thing that I've recognized, Viv, is that our dreams have the same mechanisms when we're looking at our dream symbology. It has the same mechanisms that we can look at it through our symbolic understanding.
Yes, yes. That's why I love dreams so much. And when I took a dream work class, they did say that let the person that you're reading for tell you what the meanings of these symbols are. Just guide them into it. Because when you are reading for someone, you are putting your own meaning on it. You get me? So that's essentially what you're saying. And I really like dreams. I like how you can see, like you said, you see a chair. And for somebody else, they may see a chair and all the trauma from that chair could come up just because they had something in childhood in which somebody used a chair and hit them. But you would just see a chair that, oh, okay, I'll sit down on this. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Let's talk about,
Yeah, and it's like,
no, sorry, you go.
no, I was gonna say it's the same thing as like people will get dream dictionaries, but they don't realize that they're limiting what those symbols can mean for them, because depending on a person's experience, one symbol can have a totally and completely different meaning. And one of the ways I look at that is like, say, for instance, a dog. You know, you can have a dog in your dreams, but if you grew up and you had a great experience with dogs, that dog is going to mean one thing to you in your dream. But if somebody was terrified that had been bitten, mauled by a dog, that dog in that dream is going to have a totally different subjective meaning.
Yeah.
So that's why symbols can't be gleaned from a dream dictionary and you just go with that.
Yeah, so true. I totally agree. Let's talk about the law of alignment as it's one of your core teachings, right? What is the law of
Mm-hmm.
alignment and why does it actually work better for those navigating real transformation?
Oh, great question. Great question. Girl, you've been doing some studying on me, haven't you,
Thank you.
man? Ooh, I love it. Thank you. You're making me go deep with these questions.
Yeah.
So, and a great, great question, because alignment is really, you have to look at a baseline level, so to speak. Okay. And that baseline level is the vibrational essence of you as a soul being. Okay. The baseline level for the soul is joy. That's what you're created from. That's what the universe was created from, was created through love and joy. And that's the baseline. So if you use joy as the baseline, then you can have a standard and your own internal standard in which to calibrate with.
Mm.
Okay. So when you are aligned, well, I'll say this, when you're feeling joyful, when you're feeling happy, when you're feeling elation, you're feeling all of that good stuff, you are aligned with your soul, because you are literally matched up and aligned with that vibrational essence.
Mm.
When you're feeling bad, depressed, angry, you're feeling all these other feelings, you are misaligned. So in that essence, having those two extremes can help you understand when you're aligned and when you're not. So being aligned it's a matter of you. And what I like to say is you want to let joy be your guide, because when you are aligned, your soul is essentially lighting your path for you. And when you follow your joy, let joy be your guide in that instance, then you go down the path that is meant for you. And really, that's one way that you can find your purpose, is that you literally align with your joy. But the problem is that people let life get in the way. People let other ideas and other constraints dictate their path, whether they are aligned or not. And we end up living in somebody, we end up trying to be a round peg in a square hole, is what we end up doing.
I totally agree with you. And where I agree the most is, first of all, alignment has been the name of the game since 2024 for me, because that's when I discovered my baseline. So I'm going to use myself as an example to relate to what you said. I
Hmm.
sort of had like an idea that yes, joy could be a baseline, but it was far away from where I was vibrationally. Along the way, I found myself there by just being, not thinking so much, not practicing detachment as well, just allowing myself to experience life without attaching emotions or meanings or stuff, doing the best I could. Along the way, I started to realize I was consistently having experiences that brought joy. And this was so new to me. I was like, what? This is 2024 was one of the best years of my life because it was just like this. There was no, even when there was a little, it was still aligned. There was still something that good that came from it. There was still just flow. That's the word, flow. So a lot of
Hmm.
alignment to me feels like you're being yourself without thinking. You're just breathing and life is just unfolding
Yes.
and aligning in a place that, in a way that matches you, that matches who you are at the core, and you find yourself discovering
Yes.
new aspects of yourself. You find yourself experiencing new experiences that bring out new aspects of yourself that you never saw before because you are in that space to evolve, to open up even more, to bloom because you're aligned. And you find yourself
Yes.
using your
Yes.
intuition a lot more as well. It just feels like you're in a straight line and the path is just like going. Even if there are bumps, you're still going straight. That's what it feels like to me.
No, you're absolutely right. You're on point because and what I like to think about that too is that when you do recognize that baseline, you can get pulled offside, so to speak. You can get pulled in different directions,
Mm.
but you recognize quicker when you have your baseline of joy, and when you're living, because when you're living through your joy, that is the most authentic way that you can be. When you
Yes.
get pulled off sides, then you can recognize that, whoa, wait a minute, I'm not feeling joyful, or I'm not feeling this. And that doesn't mean that it's something wrong with not feeling that, but you can recognize it, and then you can start to do what you need to do to bring yourself back in alignment. You know,
Yes.
it becomes part of a process that you can recognize of how to stay aligned, because you're never going to get to and this is where I think a lot of people get off track with spirituality, is they think that once you reach this certain level, then everything is supposed to be wine and roses and blah blah blah. Life is not like that, because you're going to try different things. You're going to step out of your comfort zone, and because you start to get bolder with this. Once you recognize that you're a creator, you get bold and you try some stuff, you know? And when you try some stuff, it don't always work out immediately. You got to figure it out. And that's when you can start to like get back into the flow, learn how to do.
So true, yes. So, how does one read scripture like a soul architect? And how can our audience start doing that too?
How, one more time, repeat that question.
How does one read scripture like a soul architect? And how can our audience start doing that too?
So when you're talking about scripture, and for me, scripture is not only the Bible. So there are a
Mm,
lot of different ancient texts.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about biblical texts, first is to understand that how we were taught it was an exoteric teaching, meaning that it was something that the masses were taught in a way. But the Bible, underneath those teachings, underneath those words, there's a whole lot of symbolism. There's a whole lot of ancient esoteric meanings that are hidden within the stories, within the characters. Okay. So you have to learn ancient symbolic language and esoteric language to really get underneath the stories in the Bible. And I'll give one example of that is the idea or the miracle of Jesus walking on the water. We were taught that that was a miracle that Jesus happened. But in reality, it is a framework that's something that all of us, and I know that you have gone through this, Vivian, where it is the water becomes a symbolic representation of our emotions. That's one meaning of it, of course. The idea of Jesus is the light of or the will of God that can bring enlightenment into situations. So we might have dealt with some really difficult trials and tribulations in our life. To say we ended up, well, we had more month than money a lot of times. Okay.
Mm.
So that can happen. And you might be stressing and straining. But then at some point you relax and you know that something is going to work out. Before, the emotions were turbulent, the water was turbulent. Okay. But once you relax, then all of a sudden you start to walk on the water. You subdue it. And in that moment, when you start to recognize everything is going to be okay, that's when the light bulb has come on and you know that you can relax. Okay.
Yes.
So that story is a symbolic framework.
Mm.
Okay. The miracle is a symbolic framework that all of us deal with. But you imagine how many 3,000 or 2,000, 3,000 years ago, something that story is very simplistic for us today.
Mm.
But back then there were no psychologists, there were
Mm.
no therapists to bring that idea to you. So they put it in a story form. But now we worship the story and forget what it's about.
Reminding us who we truly are. That Jesus wasn't a figure to worship, but a brother teaching us how to be like him.
Teaching us it was something that we are to embody,
Yeah,
not to worship.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's similar. So this, what you've said, is this reading of scripture can be applied to any teachings. It's about reading reading what they've written, like let's say the Quran, for example, reading what they've written and seeing the deeper meaning behind it, the symbology. Reading, that's what you're using to try and bring it back to who you are as a person, your identity. That's what you mean by soul architect, right? You're
Yes.
using those
Yes.
pieces to
That's
build yourself,
you
to
bringing
build
it back.
yourself.
Yes. Yes, thank you for bringing that back home for me. But yes, that is you're bringing it back to the ability to help you build who you are, to build your confidence, to build your inner power,
Hmm.
to build your ability to create. You are remembering, resurrecting, okay? And when you're able to look at these ancient texts and scriptures in that way, it can actually give you tools and frameworks to help you to build and resurrect, to become the architect of your life, to become the architect of your reality.
Yes, thank you so much for that. So you've also said that you don't teach belief. You help people remember what their soul already knows. Yes, that's profound. If someone's just starting to question everything, what's the first energetic tool or shift you'd suggest to start living by design or not by default?
Yeah. So the first thing I would do is to start to really tune into your inner emotional states, because that pure emotion is what I call the translation of universal vibration, because vibrations can be really, really subtle. They can bypass emotions. I know that when you're doing a tarot reading, it's not something necessarily mental. It's something that you can feel, that you just, and you don't even feel it sometimes. You just know. It's like it goes poof, something just comes up. And then it might take you, 5 minutes to tell them what that poof was in a second, you
Mm.
know? So in that instance, but you have to be able to tune into that inner aspect of yourself, and as a lot of times through religion we're taught that emotions are antithetical, or they're some type of an enemy to our spiritual journey.
Mm.
Okay. stuff like anger and so the so-called negative emotions. But in reality, they are ways to help us recognize who we are being in the moment and to recalibrate. So tap into that inner being,
Yes.
tap into those inner emotions and pay attention to your inner state. And that will help you calibrate and it'll help you integrate mind, body, and soul.
Thank you. And those are beautiful words to end this episode. Thank you so much, Reginald, for being here. And we had such a lovely conversation. I learned so much, and it's already things that I felt I knew, but needed even more information on. We went deep into these things, right?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here, Viv. And it was an excellent conversation. And like I said, you have a level of wisdom that is like, wow. So I am really, really glad to have this conversation with you, sure.
Thank you. It was also a pleasure. Now, listeners, for those who want to dive deeper, Reginald's Substack Sovereign Soul Collective is a gold mine. You'll find decoded symbolism, spiritual psychology, and the real tools for living aligned. The links in the show notes. But trust me, your soul will thank you. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, Viv.
Okay.